I'm recording. Okay, there you go. Hello, people. Fanny Anzai interviews. I'm your host, Fanny Anzai, and here today we have Felix Rex, as known as Black Pigeon Speaks, BPS, and big fan, long time. Thank you very much for coming, and please give us a little bit more of an introduction.
Thank you very much for having me. I've been talking to you, I guess, for a while now, and we finally put this together. I thank you very much for having me. I myself, well, I won't give all of what I do, but I have a couple of channels, and they're called Felix Rex, as you said, and that's me. And the other one is Black Pigeon Speaks. Both are highly and heavily shadow banned by YouTube, as is almost all of my big tech accounts. I mean, I'm growing on alt tech, which is what I'm hopefully going to be able to just coast off of soon. BitChute, Odyssey, Rumble, things like Gab, Minds. I'm not a big fan of Parler, and I'm not a big fan. Well, I have a BitChute account that's actually doing really well. So if anybody wants to follow me, I'd post there first. And I'm trying to get to 100,000 subscribers on there. I have, I think, about 95,000 there now. And let's see, I'm between Japan and the UK. I think the last time I talked to you was in either Paris or Berlin or the UK. I don't remember.
Yeah, I think you're in UK.
Yeah, and I'm back in Japan now. If anyone's curious, I'm not making it up. There's my street. It's a fairly large street, but it's facing north in this particular room, and it's kind of cold because I've just moved into this house recently, and I bought myself a space heater because this room doesn't have an air conditioner, but the space heater has been blowing the circuits of the house. So I have to get an electrician in here to fix it. So I'm wearing the toque, as they're called in Canada. They're not called beanies in Canada. They're called a toque. I'm not doing it because I'm hiding. I have hair. I'm not trying to hide.
You're not like Tim Pool.
I'm not like I'm not like Tim Pool trying to hide it. It's just I'm just cold in the room, and it's February, and that's the coldest month of the year in Tokyo, and luckily on the Pacific side of where we are, it doesn't get as bad as the Sea of Japan. The Sea of Japan, they just had something like yesterday 3 or 4 meters of snow in one day. So it's like, it's cold, and you get a lot of cold air off of Siberia, but it's not too bad in Tokyo. But it's been kind of chilly the last couple of days. Like 2 nights ago, it was just brutal. But last night wasn't so bad. And I grew up in Canada, so it's not like I'm not used to the cold.
Not like in Montreal, minus 25, minus
yeah, no
8.
thanks. Yeah, no thanks.
Ridiculous.
No thanks.
Yeah, here we're okay. I saw some pictures from the whatever they call the counter protesters from the on the Freedom Convoy and this weekend, and I saw some pictures of people holding signs saying "honk if you're a stupid ass baby," something like that, and I recognize the guy, the sign from Vancouver 2 days ago, and they were claiming on Reddit that was Toronto, and I was like, no, it's not. You can see there's no snow in the streets.
Well, the whole protest in Canada is very illustrative of what kind of, literally, I think that there's no hope for Canada. I think it's a country that is basically, the word global homo is used for the idea of global homogenization. So it's not anything to do with homosexuals. It's global homo, and Canada is literally on the forefront of it, wherein you literally have what I would count as probably the largest single. I'm trying to think of a better example, but no, it's the largest pushback by working class people in generations. Like, since before this reminds me of watching like movies from the 1950s when you had coal miner strikes and stuff like that. But in my lifetime, there's never been anything like this. And it's illustrative of the media. The first thing they do is these are terrorists, they're white supremacists, they just disparage the entire thing. Trudeau had a GoFundMe. They racked up, I think, almost $9 or $10 million in donations for the truckers, And GoFundMe said, no, we're going to keep all that and give it to Black Lives Matter. They've literally
But you know that in 3 days they already raised 5 millions out of those lost
yeah.
and 15 millions
But
in another page.
my point about that is that Canada, its media, its political, its government is so enthralled within the globalist system that it literally hates its people. It hates them. Like it hates them. It doesn't. I mean, on every level, it hates them. And this freedom convoy, which is quite awesome, that it's building around the world. So the Canadian truckers gave the idea to, now I've heard there's one starting up in Australia, one in Belgium, and a couple other places, and
New
I'm thinking to myself,
Zealand,
this is the largest uprising of working class people in my lifetime. So, cheers to the truckers. Push back
for
against
sure.
this whole just asinine government and their lapdogs in the media. So, like, I completely agree with them, and I wholeheartedly support them.
For sure. Yeah, I've been there. Like I mentioned, I was there 2 days ago to check, to see with my own eyes if we are a fringe minority,
Mm.
to
Oh,
show the support.
with fringe ideas and you not representing Canadian people. Sorry, I didn't mean to
And
interrupt.
it's interesting because the entire thing that at some point Justin Trudeau loves to use for media purpose to try to increase his points, social points
Yeah,
as multicultural country, but and then try to smear the freedom convoy, the truckers as white supremacists
yeah,
when so many immigrants. I saw a lady 2 days ago with a sign saying, I didn't come out of China to move to Canada.
yeah, yeah,
We came here because we believe that Canada is a stronger, freer place than whatever we came from.
yeah.
And we
I
don't
mean,
want
Canada,
these values lost.
Canada is working hard to restrict people's freedoms. I saw a very interesting speech the other day, and it was by a former RCMP officer, and he was part of Justin Trudeau's security detail. He was the sniper, and he was giving a speech talking about his training as a Mountie. And he said, nowhere in any of the laws of this country, especially in the Charter of Rights and Freedoms or the Constitution, or in RCMP training, ever was I told that I had a right to ask people for their private medical information, let alone a guy at a hockey rink asking somebody who wants to enter to play hockey or watch hockey that they would have to hand over their private medical information. It's the overreach that's happened in Canada. Like, for example, I can't come back because I'm not vaccinated, and I refuse to go to one of those concentration camps that they've built for people. So I'm not. I can't come back to Canada unless things change. And that's another thing. It's almost like Canada is now kind of a retro version of East Germany. But uh,
You said don't
I
say
digress.
some things, but but we have to put this parallel because I had this conversation earlier with Alex Adams, which we talked about iconoclasm and made a parallel, which I have even on Twitter, wondered
Mm,
which type of method or tactics the mainstream media and the government are
mm,
using when they call Black Lives Matter, Antifa, uh, protests that are violent, that are so destructive, peaceful protests, which definitely defaced statues not only in the United States, UK, but in Canada as well.
mhm.
And we had this parallel when they cannot distinguish those groups, those type of protests from real peaceful protests as people going to the Parliament Hill, playing hockey, dancing, bringing stuff like just partying, not one violent event or arrest. There was apparently one arrest, and I don't know if you know this. I will
Uh,
disclose the information. The cause of the arrest was because the guy defecated in public, because they are trying to boycott people and not give any help to the protesters. So, and it's being reproduced. You can see what the mainstream media and government are trying to smear as white supremacy, violent, call emergency. call emergency and now even ban the honking. Today they had to be silent, and the movement is still there. They're going to start doing arrests. Is the
Yeah, I've read that they're already
so
starting arrests. Yeah.
it's uh I don't know. Do you?
Well,
My question to you is okay. You make amazing videos about the current time, in the current
yeah,
years,
current
uh,
year.
and Justin Trudeau has been deeply hated. I believe there is a lot of people in the Freedom Convoy that just hates Trudeau. I would say I disliked Trudeau very much because I supported him. I had hopes when he came in, and I was not living in Canada yet, but I had hopes that he was becoming a prime minister, and I imagined that maybe this new blood, this new generation can do something different than just be corrupt and crooked and and
Just,
not. Yeah, and it was
yeah, I
just
think you've been
was like.
hoodwinked.
But I think he had a background, as you have pointed before in your videos, uh, by being an actor. He
Yeah.
has this, his performances are great, are very convincing, and that's what happened. We fell for it. Was a mistake. And now the problem is him using all this COVIDism to keep the power, to suppress the opposition, to impede free speech, and to lock us in this police state, which is becoming now. Is that all part, which you talk about, globalist agenda? A type of
Well,
communist socialism that is the cause of the fall of the Western
well,
society,
I
which
think I
would.
think it's a part of it. What's happening right now in the Western world is a deracination of the original people of the West. I mean, Canada. When I finished high school in Vancouver, and my high school class probably had about two or three visible minorities. Probably my entire high school has two or three white people left in it. There's a demographic change that's happening in Canada, America, England, Australia, New Zealand, every single Western country, where in a space of about 20 to 40 years, you're going to have a complete inversion of the population. And that can't be by accident. And it can't be happening by just by happenstance. It has to be
It,
part of a plan.
it definitely never happens that rapidly,
No, not no,
naturally, huh?
no,
Because
no.
what happens, one of the things I usually like to mention, because a lot of people say like, but you're an immigrant and you're daughter of immigrants in Brazil, because my grandparents, Japanese, come into Brazil in between the wars, and being allocated in Brazil as big groups by the Japanese government
Yeah, I know.
was
Yeah.
also something very artificial. But I keep trying to point out to people how I'm not against immigration in any way,
No, neither am I.
as soon as is legal immigration. And there is a difference on, like you said, of bringing people that have the same value and can uh, assimilate,
Yeah.
very different from people that would come to replace
Hmm. Hmm.
us, or to. I understand, because even for the Japanese people that wanted to become Brazilians, they still had their colonies. They still keep. We still have the Chinatown in Brazil, in many
Right.
towns
Yeah.
where where we have a big Asian community.
They even have a Chinatown in Yokohama.
And it's not a big deal. I don't think that is a problem, because that multiculturalism is possible when we hold the same core values.
Values. I agree. The same core
And
values. Yeah.
so that is something that is curious and interesting, because I
But
feel like, yeah,
one of the things, just to answer your question, is
yeah.
that I don't think that there's, I agree, any problem with having a multi-ethnic country. I do think you need to have a majority, a super majority of some group, whether it's like in Singapore, it would be Chinese, or whether it's in Malaysia, it would be Malay. But you have lots of Indians, lots of Chinese. Um, I think that it's definitely possible, but like you said, they have to have the same sort of root or core cultural values. And what's happening in Canada, the United States, New Zealand, what you're seeing is the wholesale importation of people. And the word you used was assimilate. That word is almost as bad as the N word now. And the reason is when you bring in disparate groups of people. And there's a very, very good study on this. There's been dozens, but the most famous one is by a man named Robert Putnam. And he's like almost every academic. He was far left, and he wanted to prove the value of multiculturalism and how it made us stronger. So what is it? Diversity is our strength. And what he found was exactly the opposite. The more diverse an area becomes, the less social trust exists, the less people are willing to volunteer, the less people will intermingle, even with their own group. And people, basically, his words were where they hunker down and they don't associate, and people become isolated and atomized. And I think that with going forward, if you're looking at our our planet's not really being run by governments anymore. It's being run by corporations. And these corporations, the way they also do it is, I mean, you take a look at something like, say, the Congress in the United States. If they were honest about who runs it, you'd have logos of Google, logos of Microsoft, logos of, Royal Dutch Shell. You'd have the people that pay the millions upon millions of dollars for these politicians to sit in those seats. Now, you got to ask yourself, I think the last election, Joe Biden spent something like over $1 billion. It's probably more than $1 billion, maybe $2 or $3 billion in a campaign to become president. Now, first of all, who's paying that? And second of all, why are people paying that amount of money to put a puppet on marionette strings into place? And part of it is I honestly believe that what we're seeing right now is the globalization of everything. And one of the worst things that you could have that I guess from a globalist's point of view, the biggest single danger is a unified group of people that would reject that globalization and that deracination. And therefore, what you have to have is a complete mix up and hodgepodge. I mean, all you have to do is look to history and please show me one successful multicultural society that was not multi-ethnic but multicultural. I mean, you could use 100 different examples from just as recently as Rwanda with two different groups, the Hutu and the Tutsi. But you could go even, go back to, World War II. I mean, you take a look at World War II today, since post-World War II.
Well, I would have something to interject because I understand that we have all the anthropology and all the studies, human resource that we have, the human like a collective knowledge that we have so far shows that we are very collectivist and segregational in our sense, in our behavior, our social behavior. We want to be with the people that look like us, and apparently more than that, the people that hold same opinions,
hold the same values,
and that live the same way. So that is kind of like very natural, I think.
Well, you can see that with the culture war that's happening throughout the Western world right now between, those that embrace globalism and those that are resisting it. So, it's political.
But for me, is to conclude that, to see that pattern repeating throughout history, and considering the amount of time we can observe ourselves, historically speaking, and segregating, moving on and still making pockets that will segregate from the old group, and that even not being able to cause and observe specializations of the groups. But at the same time, for me, it's like not because we have been doing this forever and only that we cannot evolve to another type. It comes exactly my argument in politics when people not distrust, but has so little faith that we can evolve to a more libertarian society. And I'm not even an anarchist, okay? I'm not calling Michael Malice here yet, but I'm just saying that is more the steps that we see is because we are in the apex of time and space, I would say, of humanity. So I would love to not think that we just experienced years ago, and that we were the generation that could move throughout this illuminism of the modern times, and then that we're going down to dark times right now because we cannot hold methods as scientific method or principles of, to
Well,
question whatever they
the
call
only way
science
the only way
nowadays.
that the only way that kind of society would work is if everybody agrees on it. But once you have one segment of the society that doesn't, the whole thing falls apart. And that's why, for example, if you're coming from Brazil, Brazil, the reason Brazil exists is because the Portuguese took it. The Portuguese language was the one that was used, and the Pope said, "Okay, we don't want two Christian kingdoms fighting." So he cut a cleave off of that is Brazil. Said, "Okay, Portugal, you get this, and Spain, you get the other parts." So that's why Uruguay is not part of Brazil, and it's just it can work. For example, the United States up until 1960s was a good example of a country where different kinds of people could come together and create something new. But the whole concept of America was you left behind what you were, and when you came to America, you became American. Like you left, if you came from Germany, you left Germany behind. You might bring some Wiener schnitzels and hamburgers, but you become American, right? And the way they would do that is they would have waves of immigration, but then they would close the door for like a generation or so to allow those people to assimilate. But with an open door, the way we have it now, that never closes, you're never going to have an assimilation possible. And I mean, I guess
Look,
that's
I think
that's
in
really what's
Canada,
happening.
I understand what is the issue in Canada when it comes to national identity. It's the same problem that we have in Brazil when it comes to the national identity. The same thing, that the same feel, that sentiment that we expect, the union, the unity. And the countries are so, those two countries, Brazil and Canada, they are so big and they are multicultural by origin. So it's really hard to put Irish and natives and other people from all the other places in the world that is still building Canada or Brazil together and say like, you guys feel that you're all brothers and sisters because you're born in the same place. It's hard. I think you still have that feeling when you compare to any other country. You see that in all the competitions, sports, and over and over. But even Brazilians in Brazil, they say, "Oh, the Brazilians are shitting over themselves, talking shit about themselves more than putting ourselves up." And but it's because those people from the other states, and then there is that
Mm.
beef in between states sometimes. But for me, it's again comes because they are huge countries and it's hard to create a unit, mainly when you don't have that thing. For example, when I talk about being an atheist, it's not because you don't believe in God that now we're all going to be part of the same group. You cannot hurt cats. When you talk about libertarians, you just opposed to government. Some are left, some are right, some are center, and they're all libertarians. How can you put these people together? It's really hard, and that is part of the what seems to be an issue for us because we want to be able to organize against the government,
Mm.
and it seems
And
to
and
be a,
and
a
and now
little.
it's getting hard, isn't it? The more multicultural, the same thing. Like for example, Jeff Bezos, there was a leak from Amazon, and they were encouraging multiculturalism and diversity within Amazon because what they came to a conclusion was that having a diverse workforce made forming unions almost impossible. Right. So, I mean, Canada is a very good example of a country that I always think Canada is a fake kind of artificial country, similar to Belgium. I mean, I don't know if you're aware of when Canada confederated in on Prince Edward Island, but Prince Edward Island didn't join Confederation. It's weird. Canada was created on an island that chose not to join the country at the time. So literally,
Yeah.
the country was born on an island that said, "Nah, we don't want to be part of you," and and it was basically trying to wed, disparate loyalist
But
states.
I sometimes I feel like we are very what I would say traditionalists, which is not bad. We should keep some traditions, but we should always think about what is the principles that justify this, and some traditions are supposed to stay, and maybe sometimes just historically keep them. But still, like some stuff, like when we talk about the separatist movements or part of the countries that don't want to be part, I'm very libertarian because and it's not because I put this title, but I feel like every time I think about if there is us, a person or a place or a group of people that don't really want to be part of this state the way it is, it's really hard to say that where this right of the state to have the people just because they are born there and we are already part of it the way it is, and we have very little, it's so plastered, and we have so little ways to change it,
Yeah, but
to
you're
force us
what?
to go through, so it becomes very political in that sense.
Yeah.
I know, but it's still because I think we just judge ourselves or others from being bad because they don't want to comply. And my problem mostly starts with the first question is like, why do we have to comply? No, that is wrong, because actually the whole government, for example, when it comes to the freedom convoy, the entire movement is for freedom. It's because the government has overreached.
I
And
agree. No, I agree. I think what you were talking about with regards to different parts of the country is that there's been something called Western alienation since I was a boy. And I remember when I was a kid, even when people would come in, there was a lot of people that arrived in British Columbia when I was a kid from Ontario, because I guess British Columbia was doing well at that time and Ontario wasn't, because I guess there was a lot of deindustrialization. And, there was, even at that time, I remember when elections happen, all that has to, Quebec and Ontario vote, and it doesn't matter what Manitoba, Saskatchewan, Alberta, and British Columbia vote. It doesn't matter. So
yeah,
it's like it's been since I'm a kid. It's called Western alienation, and I understand a lot of people, especially in Alberta nowadays, because Canada has gone. British Columbia is just. I mean, it's probably one of the prettier provinces, but God, it's just had terrible government for so long. I mean, this is way before you lived there, but I mean,
yeah,
I remember when I was a kid, they wanted to make these. Have you ever been over to Vancouver Island on the ferries, the big
yeah,
ones? All right. So when I was a kid, they wanted to build fast ferries, and they wanted fast ferries, and there was already, they could have just bought them from Sweden, I think, who had built them, and they ferried people between the Baltics and maybe Denmark. And it's in the same sort of general climate, same kind of weather conditions, same kind of water conditions, and they could have just bought them. Oh, no, 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 no. This was when it's a party called the NDP, for those of you that are watching that are
yeah.
not familiar with Canadian politics. They're basically communists. So they said, but they're always stealing from the coffers at the same time. That, now I should explain, they're thieving communists, right? They're not, for the working man. So they said, we're going to build these fast ferries, and our own. We're gonna design them, build them in British Columbia. They spent, I don't know how many years doing it, and they wasted billions and billions of dollars on them. And then they put them out, and they weren't seaworthy. They ended up selling them for scrap metal for about $1,000. And I remember, like, just one after another of British Columbian government just basically sinking the province. And now that, I mean, basically, what is the biggest business in Vancouver now? Real estate. I mean, when I was a kid, or not even when I was a kid, when I was a young adult, you could probably buy yourself a reasonable single family home in East Vancouver, Burnaby, Richmond, for probably $150,000 to $200,000 max, right? And that's a single dwelling home, not a one bedroom condo,
I
right?
think if you can, maybe if you come around this area, old buildings, you might be able to get something for 500,000.
That sounds cheap. How you said you're near the public market? Which public market are you near?
Richmond.
Oh, Richmond. Okay,
Yeah.
yeah, okay. You're not near in Granville. Okay.
No, no, it's the old buildings. It's we talk
Oh,
about like
I went to elementary school in Richmond, mind you.
yeah.
Yeah.
I love this area. It's
Yeah.
the
Yeah,
food is
yeah, but
amazing.
if there is an if there is an earthquake, you will sink into the inlet there, because it's all silt, right? It's just Richmond's built on a delta, so
Yeah,
if there's
it's
an
all
earthquake,
water
it'll
everywhere.
it'll just sink
It's
the whole.
definitely it's like
Yeah,
a
yeah, it'll sink. But yeah,
tsunami.
it's created also. Canada's created a situation where it's become so expensive to live. I was shocked because I was
It's
back.
ridiculous. I'm talking about this is the cheapest you can find. It's
Yeah.
like old buildings, a scrapped area, but anything closer to Vancouver, or even in more interior, but you get an older house with a bigger area,
Oh,
you talking about a million,
oh
two,
yeah,
three.
easily,
Yeah.
easily. So basically, you've priced out most of the working class people out of being able to buy a house now at this point. Uh, the future for a young person who's coming out of school with student debt, a stagnant wage market, and all of the other things combined with cost of living. I mean, I can understand why a lot of young people think that communism would be a good thing. You know, screw the rich, let's take what they have. But the problem is the system doesn't work that way.
No.
And they've rigged the system. And what we're seeing right now is basically the elimination of what was an ahistorical blip. And that was the middle class. Canada is becoming much, much more like your country, where you have a few very, very wealthy people and an underclass, and then a few technocratic people to run it, and then lots of like some wealthy people, the people that run it, and then a lot of poor people or struggling people. And Canada is becoming that. And so is the United States, and it's the consolidation of wealth, right? And it's happening. If you take a look at who owns what, I mean, it's staggering, the wealth inequality in Canada. And what do you have? You have a little puppet with drama skills and a lisp thing. Oh, we just want to be so inclusive, and like these social issues don't really matter if you can't afford a home. You know what I mean? Like these social issues of we just want inclusivity, and we got to say sorry for this. They don't
They
matter
they they
if you.
believe they have the recipe, bringing more people, as they believe they gonna be paying taxes
Oh yeah,
and
yeah, yeah, yeah. It's
paying for
yeah.
the bill, but they don't understand that the bill increases in a much higher
Oh
rate
yeah,
than
absolutely.
they can
Yeah.
pay it.
Mhm.
It's something
So
ridiculous.
yeah, all of these sort of social issues, in my mind, whether it be immigration, multicultural, any of it, that takes a backseat to the financial situation, and whether or not people can afford to live, afford to have a family, afford to have kids, and feel comfortable and not fearful of their future, right? And that I think is the prime issue that places like Canada are basically destroying the peace of mind of their people. And now with this absolute government overreach, where you have to put this mystery juice in your arm, and if you don't, you can't go outside, you can't travel, you can't cross the border, you can't come back into the country, and all of these kind of
Made
rules.
me think of the last episode of South Park.
I
The
haven't seen it.
pajama.
I haven't
Oh,
seen
not
it.
spoiled, but it's yeah, pajamas. Yeah, it's very, very curious, very interesting as usual.
Mm,
Lovely. Yeah, and you said something important. We need to. I think we all go there. For example, the Freedom Convoy.
mhm.
I'm supporting the truckers to show that it's not a fringe minority.
Yeah,
We are
absolutely.
here
It's not a fringe minority.
to defend
Yep.
freedom, to defend that free Canada that we came for.
Do you know?
Uh,
Do you know how much it fucking excuse me, how much it makes me angry is when I hear Trudeau say that these truck drivers, they don't represent the values of Canada. What the hell does that even mean? I mean, if they're saying we don't want to have an autocratic government controlling every aspect of our lives and have us under their thumb, and that somehow is not a Canadian value, well then fuck it. I don't like Canadian values then. You know, like
yeah, whatever it became.
I don't
Yeah,
like the values that Justin Trudeau is
brought.
espousing, you know.
Yeah,
So yeah, I completely agree, and I'm loving watching this truck thing. I'm loving it because it's just it totally upends the narrative of what the media, what the government, what all of these organs of the state and all the propaganda that
exactly.
they're shooting out of their mouths.
Yeah, and it's
It's
being everywhere. Quebec followed, like you mentioned, United States, New Zealand,
Belgium.
Australia. So we have, and if you go, like we went there 2 days ago because people were just come. Let's show that we're not that are not just 20% of just truckers. That's much more. It's not a fringe minority, and all the signs about freedom, no vax mandates, no mask mandates. We just want down mandates. People want freedom back. That is
Yeah,
the main core of the movement of the freedom convoy. Uh, and it's sad and it's offensive to be tried to smear as white supremacists, to not even say that we are there as, yes, you, if Trudeau says we are not Canadians now just because we don't agree,
If you don't agree with Trudeau, you're not Canadian. That's basically what he says. That is
you know.
so Trudeau. It's
Yeah.
so
And it's
Trudeau.
like, wait a minute, we thought here was the free place. So freedom is the right to say no. And we should have the right to dissent, to say, no, we don't want this vaccine. I'm fighting more even for my kids, for other people's kids, to not have to be forced to inject something that we don't know.
No, we
We
don't
don't know
know.
if it's
And
safe.
there's a lot of history, not only of these companies uh, producing just absolute Frankenstein concoctions, and they've been fined and fined and fined and fined for knowingly injuring people, like
Yeah.
billions of dollars, these companies. But also, we
And
also
we
know
have
from,
data so far that shows that we have at
oh, you
least
should be
for
careful. You should be careful what you say. So for your channel.
under the age of 19 or even
Yeah.
like younger ages, we have more risks of myocarditis than the risk of the COVID complications
Yeah,
on a natural.
you should be careful. We should not really talk about that, because literally, like, you can get you're not allowed to talk about this stuff on
Yeah,
like YouTube. So maybe move the we could talk about like the freedom aspect, but not the health aspects, because literally you're not allowed to. And that's another
that is
example, like
being
how they, freedom of speech is something you don't even have at this point,
censorship for
you
sure.
know.
Yeah,
And
it's what Joe Rogan right now is experiencing
oh,
with
it's not, Joe Rogan is just the latest. I mean, it's Alex Jones,
is
Stefan
the one
Molyneux,
that
Kevin
is
McInnes. It's just
at the
everyone at
time.
this point.
Yeah.
And Joe Rogan, I mean, they're coming after him by basically what he's done is he's given an alternative point of view of the crisis. And what they've done is they've dug through everything he's said for the last, I don't know, 10 years. And they found him saying some naughty racist words, oh no, what, oh, the sky is falling. Joe Rogan said the N-word. Oh my God. And the reason they're doing is that they're trying to assassinate his character, because he's providing a different framework with people that people can look to and judge for themselves, and that's what Joe Rogan is about. It's about silencing some of the last opposition to the narrative, and
Yeah, those
it's
are tactics to try to diminish your opponent. Or
yeah.
right now, I even think that I don't know if you follow the last news in Canada. They are talking about racism again because some incident on a hockey uh, game.
No, I
Okay,
don't know. I have no
see
idea.
that.
The thing is they
So
say,
Black
oh,
Lives Matter
diversity
will
is our
come with
strength,
all
but
the strength again, I guess, in Canada,
uh,
just to try to, deviate all the attention from the Freedom Convoy to
oh
whatever
yeah,
else.
that's exactly what
Yeah,
they're doing. That's
yeah.
exactly what they're doing. I mean, they're. I mean, I honestly believe that they're using this time to go after Joe Rogan to gaslight other people not to pay attention to what's happening on the Freedom Convoy. Because Joe Rogan's just one guy, right? He, in all respects, I mean,
At the same time, they, like you said, they already gaslight anybody that wants to talk in that same sense as
yeah.
Joe Rogan. Don't talk
Oh yeah,
about
yeah. You
this
can,
subject.
you
Yeah.
can. And it's shocking to me how what was considered the political left is now in lockstep with the corporate and global plans for humanity at this point. And they applaud censorship, thinking that it's not going to roll onto them once they've censored everybody else. It's incredible. Um, but yeah, I think the problem with countries like Canada is especially is it's becoming more and more and more atomized, completely atomized. And they don't I don't think they expected this kind of response from these truck drivers. And this is how out of touch somebody like Justin Trudeau is when he says that this is just a fringe idea. This is just fringe, and these ideas don't represent the good Canadians. That's the other thing. Like, you have to have certain opinions to be a good Canadian, and if you don't have those opinions, you're a bad Canadian. And I just reject that. The whole point about having a democracy and the whole point about having freedom of speech is to allow the best ideas to rise to the top. But we don't have that anymore. What we have is just mandates, and everyone shut the hell up. And I don't know. I'm wondering if this will actually change anything. But I would say that um, I've just been flabbergasted that people actually still voted for this guy, this clown, 3 times now. Like, I mean, I knew what he was about within the first when he gave his first speech after winning. When he won, the House in Parliament was only made up by I think 24% of women. But what he said is, I'm going to make my cabinet 50%, 50%. But that doesn't represent the cabinet. So he was literally putting vaginas in positions in the cabinet because they had a vagina, not because they were the best person to do that job, right? And it's
Yeah, he came with a very CRT
yeah,
agenda. You
yeah.
know, the entire thing, the woke, the representative, like the
Beyond.
feminism, fourth wave
I mean,
feminism.
I remember the first year. Okay, so back in the Cold War, and this was the policy of almost universally the policy of intelligence agencies like the CIA. In Canada, it's called CSIS. That homosexual men didn't get promoted where they were able to handle sensitive materials because they thought that they would be more easily blackmailable. And this was at a time when homosexuality wasn't publicly accepted. And it makes sense to me. I mean, that those were the times. That's what the public opinion was, and you had to protect the country doing so. But he literally, and this was before I think he was even born. So he was talking about like the 1950s and 1960s, and he's given a speech and he was crying. He was crying. I just, and this was his drama skills coming back as being a former substitute drama teacher. He was going, oh, this guy, we're so sorry about the dark history of Canada. And I was looking at this going, who is this clown? You know, I mean, who you're crying your eyes out about job placements in an organization during the Cold War before you were born. And I thought to myself, this is the clown that's going to lead the country. I mean, and then he would always go everywhere flashing his socks. Look at my designer socks. So yeah, let's just say I'm not a big fan of the Prime Minister of Canada at all, not even in the slightest. So
Yeah,
yeah, I mean, you could put a ficus tree up there, and he'd probably have more charisma and more intelligence than Justin Trudeau.
yeah. The one thing I feel bad about, we definitely support him, is the way that he stood now as this peacock, which I
Mhm.
would call more. Tucker Carlson make a great video. I don't know if you saw that on
No, I didn't.
it, talking about his skills, the disguising skills of Trudeau, and
Mhm.
it's definitely worth to watch. It's amazing,
Right.
pretty good jokes about it. Uh, and the way that he likes to use all the multiculturalism and bring more immigrants with this idea, the same idea the left used in United States to bring more votes,
Yeah, bring more
bring
votes.
more
Yeah.
votes. Um, and then now comes to this entire speech about how these people, us who came and still believe freedom and will oppose his COVIDism, fascism here, how we don't have the right opinion, or how we are the bad ones for opposing, for not complying to such a, you know, I don't even know what to say about this, because I
Mhm.
never seen such a thing. Like I never thought we would experience this after, in this century, at this moment, let's say, as he likes to say,
I
in
honestly,
the
the
current year.
in the current year, I could not have imagined it got this in 2019, at the end of 2019, at the beginning of 2020. I could never have imagined that we would be having a conversation like this in 2022. Like it just, I would have thought you were a complete lunatic
If I
if you
told
had
you that
said,
people
yeah, I would have thought
vaccine,
you were a
mask
lunatic.
mandates, vaccine passports, people being fined on the hospitals because they didn't take the vaccines,
Yeah,
all the types of things that were slippery slopes in
mm,
the beginning of the discussion. And we
yeah,
said,
yeah.
no, they're not going to do that, are they? And you're crazy, of course not, and end up happening. And so it is quite. That's not.
You
It's
got a
quite.
cat?
No, it's chips or something like a
No worries.
and the one interesting thing, because I saw Viva Fry on streets in Ottawa, and the counter protests trying to say oh, because this is a fringe minority, 85% of people took the vaccines are wearing the mask, and that's why we're going to go back to normal, not because of this loud minority. And
Mhm.
even though I don't care who is going to get there, we just want that to
Yeah.
end, to get to the end. But my point was always, how can all these people still standing there and yelling against democracy, using democracy to say you need to be quiet because the majority chose so, when
Mhm.
we still live in a place, even here in Brazil, we are democratic republic. Here we have the prime minister, but we have the Democrats and Republicans, because we need that balance, because we need to protect the minorities, or else
Well, yeah, absolutely.
it has
That's
to have a point that even the majority cannot vote for.
yeah,
And
they
it
can't
makes.
override minorities and steamroll them into the ground. And this is what COVID has shown. It's shown that COVID is probably one of the best examples of ideological tribalism, I think, probably within the last, I don't know, in my lifetime. I can't remember anything like it, but I would agree. And Canada's a very weird country. As I told you, I think it's fake. It's a fake country, like Belgium, and it's filled with a lot of people that believe that they're good, and in order to be good, you have to agree with what they believe the majority agrees with, and that makes you a good person, right? And if you don't agree with what the majority says, well, then you're a bad person. And they have this sense of moral justice. Now it's quite interesting. It's a lot of people, there's a whole concept behind it called preference falsification, that people, when in groups, will falsify their beliefs, their ideas, and their preferences because they don't want to be seen going against the group majority thought or the group majority in their thinking. And I wonder how much of that majority in Canada is actually just people going along to get along, right? And I would wonder, if they didn't have all of the cajoling from the state, the forced lockdowns, like you said, finding people passports for COVID. For example, I can't come back unless I get either vaccinated or go to one of those concentration camps for COVID's, deniers. I think they're using the word deniers, uh, this is not a healthy society. It's just not. And the fact that you have other people that believe that it's all about moral posturing when people try and say we are the ones that are doing the right thing, and it's we who are going to make our everyone's lives better, and you bad people over there for disagreeing with us, well, you're just bad, you're a fringe minority, and nobody cares what you have to say because you don't represent our culture and our society. We do. And that's where I think Canada is in big trouble if this sort of is an idea that takes hold, you know.
Yeah, we are. I hope all the eyes, at least the world keep the eyes in Canada, and that would stop the government to try to crush completely the freedom convoy, the
Mm.
voice, the whatever we have left over of free speech that has been so suppressed
Yeah.
by COVID in general. All the tactics of COVID,
Mm.
of lockdown, social distancing, you can't gather, you can't talk to people. During this time, Trudeau called the early election, and as I don't know if you follow that, but no opposition had the chance, time to organize, and they
Hmm.
even suppressed a third option that would be like the PPC, which are libertarians, which was the only party against the mandates. They could not show up. They tried to smear Maxim.
One of my favorite photos of all time was during that time, Maxime Bernier, he was at literally at, it looked like a baseball field at an elementary school, giving a speech. and he was talking about how his party was against all of these mandates and passports and whatnot. And there was a picture of him because they weren't allowed to have a gathering, right? It's against the law. You see the RCMP come in, and they've got Bernier handcuffed in the backseat of a squad car, and next to it at the exact same time, you had Justin Trudeau. He was at one of these. It was the G7 or the World Economic. I don't know what it was. One of those sort of
I think
global.
it was
It
G20.
it was in Cornwall in the UK, and what you had as a picture of, and this is before Prince Philip died, Queen Elizabeth's husband. You have a picture of him with Macron and the Queen's husband and all of these sort of leaders, and they're all drinking these like posh looking champagne, and they're giggling and laughing with each other, and not a single person was wearing a mask, not one. And so you juxtapose those two pictures. You have Bernier for giving a speech at a baseball field being put in the back of a squad car, being arrested, and at the exact same time you have Justin Trudeau hobnobbing with the elites, not following any of the rules that they're forcing on anyone else. So yeah, I don't know how many times I have to say it, but yeah, screw that guy.
It is the hypocrisy of the elites, which I mentioned early when we were talking. When I was talking to Alex Adams, he mentions that he writes about on one of his articles talking about the COVIDianism, and it's definitely something quite annoying to see that pattern repeating over and over, and how we are being taken our rights, our freedoms, by politicians that don't even follow their own rules.
Yeah.
And as you mentioned, the Trudeau with Maxime, the arrests, so many arrests, pastors here just because they
I
want
saw
to.
that. Yeah,
You
it
saw
was like
that?
he was a
And
Polish
they
pastor or
were
something.
calling
Yeah, and he's like,
Gestapo and the
yeah,
state police.
yeah, and they show up at his church saying you're not allowed to have a church, and I'm thinking to myself, what, I don't know, I don't even know where to begin, but if people roll over and continue to accept this, if there's not like a freedom convoy until this ends every single day, then it won't. And this is the funny thing too, right? So I'm in Japan right now, and Japan has never had a lockdown. Nothing. People wear masks, but that's actually an Asian habit. I don't know. Have you ever been to Japan?
No, but I know they used the masks quite a long
They,
time
they, they
ago,
have
since
because
the
it's.
first, maybe 20 years ago,
Oh
when
yeah, yeah, yeah.
every 10 years we have one of those epidemics.
Oh no, no, no,
We
no.
had
They
the
just they just
swine, we
they just wear
had
them in the winter. They wear
the
them in the winter.
H1N1,
No,
and
no,
they
no.
always wearing the masks all
Yeah,
the
yeah.
time.
It's not just that. It's just like in wintertime and people have a cold and they don't want to cough on people, so it's polite. It's not just that. And but other than that, there's been nothing. Basically, there's been no revoking of people's rights of any kind. None. Zero.
Yeah.
And if you look at, for example, the United Kingdom, they've just stopped everything. No
Yep.
masks, no mandates, no passports, nothing. Back to work, back to usual. Life's going back. Now, it's kind of weird to me that you can have countries like this and there is no difference in outcome. So I remember reading a study that was done where New York was like one of the more hardcore states in the United States with all of these mandates, lockdowns, mass, blah blah blah, and Florida was basically open the whole time, and there was no statistical difference between the two, none, zero, right?
Yeah.
So none of this government overreach has done a single thing to keep people safer. But the thing is, as well, as I believe it was Thomas Jefferson said, people that will trade their liberty for their safety deserve neither. Right. And I agree with them. I mean, if you're willing to trade your liberty and your freedom for a little bit of what you believe is safety, well, you don't deserve either. You don't deserve your liberty. You don't deserve your freedom. So
And so far, for of course, it's hard nowadays. The statistics and data is there, and a lot of people take that and interpret and misinterpret whatever way they want.
yeah.
But we do have, for people who understand statistics, the data is pretty clear.
Mhm.
Another day I was watching, I don't remember which one of the. I watched so many, Sunny Dende and what is the name of that old guy? Net? Oh, okay, he's sleeping. There is another guy that he reads a lot of studies, and he was talking about is vaccines or mandates inefficient, and
Oh, be
it
careful.
was a 30 minutes video talking about data, and I was like, look, you, as you mentioned, we have data enough comparative of places where we had the mandates and not,
Mhm.
and you can see the seasonal pattern of the
Mm.
disease. It
Yeah.
just doesn't change, and I think that is very conclusive to answer the question of
Mm.
the inefficiency of the masks and the vaccine. So
Mm.
it would never justify the mandates at first place, and I think the main problem with the mandates is that we're creating a second class citizens, not just by option, not just by the
Mhm.
people that will choose by religious or
Mhm.
whatever other reason to
Mhm.
not take the vaccines, but by a lot of people who cannot make the choice to take the vaccines, that medically cannot take the vaccines, and would be impeded of having normal lives if you don't go back to normal. So going back to that vivify conversation on the street, if we have 85% of people vaccinated and we have COVID, I think it's time to pull out the COVID stick out of their bum
Yeah.
and go
Yeah.
back to normal life. You
Yeah.
know, don't need to give that to the truckers. Just go there. Trudeau doesn't need to go in front of everybody say, "I'm sorry, I got everything wrong." They can just say like, "We're doing this because we got the goal. The
Yeah.
goal
Mhm.
was reached," and they can claim victory
Yeah.
over freedom, but give people freedom because that is all what we're
Right.
asking pretty much.
Well, it's interesting because they were talking about this. I was in London, and it was weird. Last spring and summer and most of autumn, I was in Europe, and I was in different countries. I was in Paris and Berlin, and then the UK. And it's weird how all three countries dealt with it completely differently. Like the French and the Germans were just. It was like being in a prison. Like it was. Where I went to London, and it was just like back to normal already. So. I agree with you. All he has to do is say, "Okay, we're done. We've reached the goal. We're finished. We're going to go back and have a normal society again." But I think maybe they've gone so far, it's going to be very hard for them to walk it back. Is part of the
They don't
problem.
even need to admit because I understand that it's hard for them to admit any
Yeah,
type of
yeah,
we did something wrong, we should not have done all that. That's why we're taking it back. They don't feel like they can do that explanation. But they could just say like we got it.
mm,
That's
mm,
why. Instead of try to push to the kids, because that is when I think it will go across a lot of people's principles, and I'm definitely up there to defend our children to
yeah.
not be stabbed by whatever we don't know how safe is in long
Well,
term.
there's been no long-term studies because it was just rushed, and
Exactly.
and and so yeah, I would agree with you. I would agree with you on that.
And yeah, I don't want to hold you much. I
No
thought
worries.
we talked about an hour,
Mm.
so I'll finish here, and we can just give a little brush in the end and see if you want to edit anything. Um, Thank you very much for coming, and please let people know how they can support. And there's a lot of nice merch, and I love your advertisement.
Yeah, it's with
Your
my with
ads
my
are
name
so good.
tag. Yeah, my
That is
name
really
tag.
good. Your own sponsor yourself.
Yeah, I sponsor myself. Yeah, anyone, you can just find me at felixrex.net, and from there you can find me on everything. So it's not too hard.
Thank you very much, everybody. Go check and support and follow the Freedom Convoy, and
Absolutely.
see you guys next. Thank you very much and have a good night.
Absolutely.
I'll stop recording
All
and
right.
we will. Bye.